Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. I'm just sitting here drinking my morning coffee. Got a hook grip on the cup because I practice it every damn day. See, no fake sip that time. And today I want to talk to you guys about something that's going to sound silly. People are going to be like, yeah, that's obvious. But it really doesn't seem to be obvious with a lot of the other YouTube videos I'm seeing these days. And that comes down to specificity of training. Specificity of training. And people have all these ideas that all these different assistance exercises are going to guarantee that they improve a primary lift. And the reality is that's simply not true. In fact, the best way to increase any exercise, I don't care what that lift is, whether it's a squat, bench, deadlift, a press, a weighted chin-up, right? Weighted chin-up might be important to you instead of any of the big four. The best way to increase any given lift is to get more practice with that lift. And it's not even about necessarily the muscle imbalances that people think about. Like, oh, well, you know, if my quads are weak, then obviously the best way to bring my squat up is to find quad-specific exercises. Well, no, not necessarily, because if your quads are a weak link in your squat and you keep hammering the squat and you keep trying to dial the technique in, the weak muscle groups will eventually catch up because the movement pattern itself will demand that they will. They may not catch up 100% because you are stimulating growth in other muscles, but the thing I would point out is why would you not want to stimulate growth in other muscles? Your quads will eventually get bigger and stronger, and you're going to want those other muscles to be strong. So you can create imbalances by too much focus on the other stuff. But that's kind of the side note. That's not even the important part. Because you have, again, so much focus on all these accessories, and a lot of this comes from the whole West Side Barbell model. But the interesting thing is, in the West Side Barbell model, they've noted that there are common accessory exercises that a lot of their guys don't get carryover from. And that's kind of the ironic part. These are the people who promote this stuff the most and have made it catch on that they talk about, well, you know, 90% of my work is done with assistance movements or accessory exercises instead of the primary movements. Well, you guys also got to remember their primary movements are not the same as other people's squat, bench, and deadlift. They're all multiply, wraps, everything else. And they don't necessarily want to be suiting up all the time. It would be very difficult with their training. They use other close enough variations and do enough different ones of them that they still get the strength curve training that they want. But their squat, bench, and deadlift is probably not the same as your squat, bench, and deadlift as an exercise. Once they throw that multiply suit on and the knee wraps and everything else. It's a totally different exercise without even the same bar path. But again, it's kind of a pain in the ass to put all that stuff on. Now, the thing when I say that not everyone gets carryover, what I'm saying is just because there's someone out there saying this is a great accessory for this movement, I can tell you right now that's usually someone with very minimal training experience who hasn't been around a lot of really serious lifters. If they universally believe that they can come up with 2 or 3 assistance movements that are amazing, all the way around amazing assistance movements for any given primary lift, again, they haven't been around a lot of lifters, because you will find lifters who test this and find that sometimes the really popular assistance or accessory movements don't give them any carryover. None. To the point where they're like, I'm not wasting my time with this thing anymore, because when it goes up, my main lift doesn't go up. And what people need to understand, when you're adding in these movements, what you're usually trying to do is break through a plateau. You've been stuck at a 500 squat for 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. You're trying to get to a 510, so you use an assistance exercise to maybe bring up a different movement pattern, a weak point. But trust me, you're going to build the 500 squat by doing squats in the 400 range over and over and over. And usually your first course of action, if you want to get better at any given exercise, you either need to be adding more weight to the bar in that exercise or you need to be adding more volume to it. If you want to get better at low reps, even more importantly, specificity of training. You want to get good at singles, you need to be doing more first reps. You don't necessarily want to come in and waste a bunch of time with 3x10 on a squat. I'm not saying you couldn't do that in some sort of volume block of training, but coming in and doing a bunch of doubles or triples will give you more first reps. Because your technique is different. When you do a 3, a 5, a 8 rep set, your reps are actually different. Even though they might look identical, there's some variation from rep to rep. And you're not setting up over and over. So if you really want to get good at singles, more first reps. And that's the thing even the West Side guys promote. You can come in, if you want to get really, really good at doing one rep, you need to come in and do a lot of volume of back off work with doubles and triples so that you get more first reps. And some people would argue you could come in and do 20 singles with a moderately heavy weight. And there are some serious lifters who do train in that manner, who absolutely recommend it, even on things like deadlifts. So you've got that to consider. But when it comes to these assistance movements, people need to remember there is no universal assistance movement. There's assistance movements that I even say, hey, these are good assistance movements, that there are coaches who say, no, they're not. And you'll find multiple extremely good coaches who find they don't personally get carryover from one and another says they get immediate carryover. Like I put 20 pounds on my bench press by overhead pressing. Right? I mean, Paul Carter, Charles Polquin will both tell you that the strict press is one of the best bench press accessories they have for most of their athletes. And you'll get other guys like Greg Knuckles who say when they've worked on the press, they didn't get any carryover. They didn't find any improvement to their bench press at all. None. Same thing. You'll see people who talk about doing front squats for their back squat. Now, people will argue, well, low bar squatters don't get as much out of the front squat as the high bar squatters. But then you'll also see world level high bar squatters, guys who high bar squat in powerlifting competition, who in their experience say they don't front squat anymore because when they've tried to use it as an assistance movement, that they put 40 pounds on or 50 pounds on their front squat and it did not break them through their high bar squat plateau. Their max stayed the exact same. It didn't improve it. And we get into deadlifts and we always argue that, everything improves your deadlift. Any sort of squat, any sort of row, any sort of pull off the floor will improve your deadlift to some extent, or it'll help build it or help maintain it if you're not doing as much deadlift volume. But you're going to find lifters who step back and say things like, well, I don't know, I found the power clean. When I spend lots of time power cleaning, my deadlift seemed to regress. And I've heard top level lifters say that. Then you have other lifters who say, oh, the power clean carries over amazingly well to the deadlift. The same thing with squats, different back exercises. There's a lot of debate because you literally find different lifters out there who will take an exercise that you have several coaches and lifters out there who say this really seems to carry over really well, and then you'll have another lifter, well, I did a bunch of it and my deadlift regressed. I lost 20 pounds off my deadlift. Others, I put 20 pounds on my deadlift by doing it. That's the problem we run into assistance work and accessory work. Hypothetically, any exercise that makes any of the primary movers involved bigger or stronger on a primary lift should, in theory, help you with it, unless that's not addressing your weak point best, in which case it may not improve it. In theory, it should always, but it doesn't always seem to be the case in practice. Doesn't always seem to be the case in practice. And so that's one of the things you see is that once people start messing with the accessory work, who get really obsessed with it, they end up having to do tons of different accessory movements because some of them are working and some of them are not, and they just build everything up with kind of the bodybuilder approach. Well, let me just get every muscle big and it will, in theory, hopefully carry over. And usually that will work, but it's a shotgun approach at the end of the day. And what you usually find, and again, I've heard even Jordan Feigenbaum will say that. He will jump in and say, look, yeah, a lot of these things work, but let's be realistic here. If you want to get better at the deadlift, you probably need to be doing more deadlifting because the deadlift carries over to the deadlift better than any other accessory movement does. Just like he also says, look, we can argue about compound movements all we want, that, hey, rows will build biceps, bench press builds triceps, and they do. But he would argue if you want really big arms, you should probably, I don't know, maybe you should throw in some actual arm work. And this is even coming from me saying, hey, compounds will build these things. They might not build them to gargantuan proportions, but there's some truth to that. Specificity of training matters. Specificity of training will always build king, and it's so weird that people want to try to get away from that so often because it's like they just can't accept the fact that even though we know specificity of training, or the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demands, is the core principle of exercise science and has been so for generations because it's been proven repeatedly, people always seem to want to find a way around it. And I think a lot of it comes down to because if everyone followed the specific adaptation to imposed demands principle, the SAID principle, specificity of training, it would be harder for a lot of people to coach anyone. All these new training programs wouldn't be coming out. No one would be buying them because they get silly, because at a certain point training isn't that complex. It's not that complex. If you want a given muscle to grow, you should probably do a lot of exercises with heavy weight, good volume, that are going to make that muscle grow. I'm not saying it has to be always specific compounds. Compound movements work best, but there might be times when you do something that's close to an isolation movement. Notice I don't ever promote isolation movements. You know, like cheat curls probably work better than strict curls because of the compound element. Just be honest here. They don't detract anything from the bicep recruitment, but they bring other muscles into play, right? Done a certain way, they can probably stimulate more total growth. But the whole point is that if you want something to grow, you should probably train it, and train it really hard if it's a priority, if it's lagging. If you want to get really good at an exercise, not saying some assistance work or accessory movements can't help. What I'm saying is they're not guaranteed to help. They're not guaranteed to help. If you want to get really good at an exercise, you should probably be doing more of that exercise. You need to be doing more of it, and you only add in other stuff when it's probably necessary or to prevent some sort of muscle imbalance. And I think that's the biggest part of accessory work in general, is just there to prevent muscle imbalances from happening. That's it. That's the primary work. I think it's sometimes better as an injury prevention tool than to actually help you get stronger. Because at the end of the day, getting hurt will also slow your strength down. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.